Alright, and it says we're live, so we should be ready to go. Come on, come all, New World Supernova here. And today, on this glorious days, we are talking about One Piece, Chapter 1000. Today I have with me Daniels. Daniel, say hello. Hello, hello. This is kind of crazy, I'm not going to lie. When I chose not to do a live reaction for this chapter, specifically. Just because it's not often that you get to such a landmark like this, and I had a bit of a moment where the chapter had come out, but I wasn't quite at a stage where I could record, and it was one of those days where I just really I needed to read the chapter, if that makes sense. Yeah, no, I I also wanted the peace of being able to sit down and just enjoy the last milestone of One Piece before its end. Like, oh, I went in. It was one of those chapters where I went into it with a lot of expectations, but when the spoilers started leaking, I had the title of the chapter spoiled for me: Straw Hat Luffy or Mugiwara Luffy. And as soon as I saw that that was the chapter, I ghosted Twitter for the whole week. Until I knew the chapter was 100% out, until I saw someone else dropping a live reaction for it, I did not look at One Piece. And as soon as I knew it was out, just that last little bit of child in me was like, you need to just savor this. We have no more triple digit chapters. This was the first four digit chapter, and it's genuinely monumental. You know what I mean? Ooh, big chapter. Not many at all, and realistically, this was a good chapter. All right, so I've got the chapter up at the moment. Apart from the cover page for Shonen Jump and that celebrating chapter 1000 and having all the other artists, you know, contribute to drawing One Piece characters, that was really good. But right at the beginning of the chapter, we have Luffy talking to Sicilian and the Musketeers, and just the remnants of the Minks. And apart from that little speech with Luffy being like, "Oh yeah, yeah, sweet as, thank you so much for protecting Rizo. I've got it from here." The only thing I could think of while I was looking at that was, "Where's Jack?" Nah. So Jack's so he's come down. So he's on one of the levels, healing up at the moment. So he's yeah. So he's in the clear zone at the moment. Then immediately following that was something that I've been saying for the absolute longest, at least to some extent, where Marco threw Zoro up to the top of the roof and was intercepted by King and Queen. The only things that I couldn't say that I predicted was, one, Marco literally throat grabbing the both of them and holding them back while Zoro got flung up. Now, I don't think Marco's going to take them 2v1, but Well, okay. Okay. I have three things to say for this. First one is this is no different to me than when X Drake blocked Killer in a Rouge. Like, just because you prevent two people from doing something doesn't mean that you can necessarily absolutely thrash them in a fight. You're just stopping someone from doing something. Number two, I had no clue how augmented Queen was. I knew last chapter Queen had removed his tongue and had a shotgun that shot playgrounds from his mouth. That was pretty cool. This chapter, we see his neck is fully augmented in his devil fruit form, which to me means like he's got Yonji's sort of mechanics built into him. And so we know that he's got some form of connection with Judge. So I wouldn't be surprised if Queen has nearly the same types of augmentations that the Vinsmokes have, plus having had a zone to boost in his physical attributes, plus just being like a New World pirate and good work, like good fighter with Haki. Yeah, the Wildfire, King the Wildfire. Or Conflagration. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's possible as well. There's like a whole there's a whole lot of things that could go like on here. Like another thing that I've definitely thought of is with people saying, "Oh, well, Marco stopped King so easily, like it's making King look bad." No, it doesn't. The only person that I think would have been able to stop that in this moment is Katakuri, maybe Ben Beckman if he's got really good observation haki. Like King seems to be set up to be an armament specialist as opposed to an observation specialist. We haven't had anyone mention how, you know, oh, look out, the person we've got to watch out for is King. He can see the future, you know what I mean? Like, there's no build up for him having good observation. We know he's a perceptive person and that he should be a strong fighter since Kaido values him as a right hand man, and Kaido's entire crew is built off power. You know what I mean? So I would not be surprised if King's whole thing is he's just a flying pterodon that also has a sword and can use Rio, which I'll get to Rio later in the chapter, but it it doesn't really change much of my perspective of the characters. The next scene we cut to the he's in that gray zone. He's in that gray zone where he had a shot at being a Yonko, same as Blackbeard. We know that Blackbeard ended up beating him, but we don't know to what extent. Obviously, Marco's here, so it's not like Marco got beaten so bad he died. Yeah. So moving on, we have a little bit of a hint at the Willa D, and with last chapter, we obviously found out. Well, Momo had found out that Ace was Roger's son, and that Luffy's Ace's brother, and has that connection with Roger, and obviously being the D in that. And we have Yamato talking about the Willa D a little bit here, and about how Ace talked about. Well, essentially, Ace believed Luffy was going to be the Pirate King. So, oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I now wholeheartedly believe as well that Yamato will join the crew. Um, just like this symbolic nature of the fact that Yamato made the Vivre card for Ace, and then Ace gave that off to Luffy. To me, it's honestly like reading that, it hit that chord of me. It almost felt like this is coming full circle, which really Wano sort of is the climax of the New World saga. The next section of the story is like the conclusion of the story. Like M- Marineford, Marineford finished the Grand Line. Wano's gonna finish the New World. After this, we're gonna finish One Piece, which is crazy. It's almost unthinkable. You know what I mean? But yeah. And so then we have Luffy managing to finally make it to the roof, and I feel like everyone predicted that Luffy was going to make it to the roof for Chapter 1000. Um, don't necessarily know if everyone agreed that it was going to happen exactly like this, but damn, and I the two-page spread of the five Supernova staring down the two Yonko was amazing. Like, it just it feels so weird to be here at this point. You know what I mean? To have finally made it to this part of the series. Yeah, it's done. We win. We win. It's gonna be a huff. It's gonna be like a uphill fight, but we're gonna win. And it's just you can feel that aura coming off it. So So after the two-page spread, we've got the moment where Luffy walks past Kaido and Big Mom, right? When when that happened, I saw the bottom left panel as the first thing that popped up when the page loaded. I thought he was about to use Conquerors. I thought this was about to be a Conquerors clash, and there was going to be an overwhelm against the two Yonko with Conquerors for some reason. Like it had nothing to justify it. It's just I had a moment. I saw the blurring, like the faded out eyes. He's looking down. He just does not look happy. And I saw him pass the two Yonko, and I thought, no way. It and obviously that didn't occur to that same degree. But I was shook. I was so shook. I was so giddy, and it's like coming. Yeah, it was such a good moment. It so going back to it, going back a little bit, I should say. So we now have the two Yonko facing down against the five Supernova. Do you think that's the matchup for now? Do you think anyone else is going to join this fight for a while, or do you think this is going to be just the way it sort of pans out, where it's 5v2, maybe swaps out between who? So what what I could definitely see happening right now is Luffy's got eyes for Kaido, Kid's got eyes for Kaido. Luffy and Kid aren't gonna avert their gaze. They're both trying to get revenge against Kaido here. So those are the two definitive people that are gonna just be chasing down Kaido, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Mm, yeah, second best. Yeah, I could definitely see Kid and Luffy going after Kaido here. Big Mum goes to intercept. We know that Big Mum has swordsmanship skills, but obviously isn't. Her swordsmanship skills come from the fact that she's just got ridiculous power and wields a sword, as opposed to being a swordsman. I see Zoro and Killer intercepting Big Mum, and I see Zoro, Killer, Law versus Big Mum, and her getting frustrated that she can't fight Luffy with Luffy and Kid versus Kaido. Mm. All right, so just continuing on because we can come back to this. So we have Luffy walking up to Kinemon. Kinemon having it felt again. If this chapter feels like a callback to a lot of things, this felt like a Robin's "I want to live" moment. This felt like a Vivi's "I need help" moment. This felt like a Nami's "please" moment, where Kinemon's just asking one more time to Luffy, I need you to beat him. And what can you say other than a Law gets him the hell out of there? Kaido goes to hit Luffy in the back of the head. Luffy obviously dodges. And then we get the Gear 3 Red Rock. This, like, I know Kaido's getting back up. And I know, like, I'm sure he was a bit bloodied in that from the hit. And I have points to talk about with the hit. Because there's a lot more that goes into this than I think a lot of people are understanding. But Kaido gets hit, and this is so reminiscent of the Bellamy scenes. Or the Celestial Dragon scene. But obviously against the strongest creature in the world. This is Luffy's last, like, declaration of war. And again, really worthy of Chapter 1000. Oh, definitely. So the beautiful thing the beautiful thing about this is last chapter we had set up that Ace had punched a statue of Kaido, right? Red Rock, well, the Red Hawk is very reminiscent of Ace's Fire Fist. This is not just a Red Hawk, but this is a Gear 3 Red Hawk, so it's powered up with Rio. And again, like, to people that are like, oh, well, it's unrealistic. I've seen so many comments today on different threads of people going, well, One Piece is now Dragon Ball. Power scaling doesn't make sense. Apparently, all you need to do is do push-ups, sit-ups, and a 5k run for 2 weeks, and you can beat the strongest person in the world. And that's not it. Not There aren't many people in the world that have Rio. It's a very unique technique, something that's normally saved for swordsmen. When they first get to the Grand Line, it was around the 60 mark. We're following the 1% of the 1%. Yeah. Well, we we know that each arc Luffy gets stronger and stronger, right? So the last just pure destructive feat we have of Luffy in a Gear 3 punch, to me, would be against Pika or Chinjiao. He hit Shinjiao's already damaged head. That was supposed to be continental level, so because he's old and because it was already damaged, take that away from him. We saw a Gear 3 punch absolutely just demolish Picker. Like, it was just like crushing a pebble between your hands, or crushing a hard chunk of sand between your hands. So this is like a mountain. This is a mountain level destroying attack with Rio that destroys stuff from the inside out. Like, you got to think here. You're getting you're getting hit in the face by a mountain, and then you're also having your head scrambled. Like, your brain's being scrambled like scrambled eggs. Plus, you're catching on fire on the outside of your skin. Like, and I think Luffy has a lot more than this that he's capable of, and I think Kaido has a lot more of this than he's capable of. Like, I think Kaido doesn't even. If you can hurt Kaido in his dragon form, he'll transform into his human form. If you can hurt Kaido in his human form, he'll start to fight. We've never seen Kaido try to dodge an attack. We've never seen Kaido try to outskill an attack. We have not seen Kaido use a hybrid form. We do not know if Kaido is awakened. Like, so I think this is where we get to the point where Luffy has future sight. So for Luffy as an individual, he can't be hit once, because if he's hit once, or maybe a couple times, he's out of the fight. We have the advanced Rio, so he's now able to hurt both Big Mom and Kaido. So that's what keeps him in this fight. He can damage them now, right? In base form, right now, Luffy's human form, Kaido's human form, they're doing damage to each other. So what happens when Luffy's damaging Kaido but it's not enough? So Luffy goes Bounce Man. Kaido goes Hybrid. Luffy goes Snake Man to deal with him in a faster state, so he tries to outpace him. Kaido's an awakened zone, so he's got a healing factor as well. So it's not just you've got to outpace him and damage him, you've got to do it fast enough to negate the healing factor to knock him out. This will be hands down the best fight in the series so far. This will top the Katakuri fight, this will top the Rob Bellucci fight, and I don't think there'll be any debate on it at all. The questions really are, how is Kid going to perform? How is Killua going to perform? How is Zoro going to perform? How is Law going to perform? Because we know that Luffy's gone through all these things, all these step-by-step processes, building this foundation each arc to get to this point. How are these other people going to be on a competing level? And with the way that Yamato set it up this chapter, it's seeming that these are the 5 people that you need to watch out for this era. And do you know what the crazy thing about that is? It's dead wrong in a way. Because think about it, Daniel. You've got 5v2, right? And we are really hyped. Think about how hyped you are right now to see Luffy, Kid, Law, Zoro, Killer versus Big Mom and Kaido, right? And just take a moment to objectively pull yourself out of that situation. And you know how we've had conversations in the past about whether or not admirals are as strong as Yonko or not. Well, we've seen now what Rio can actually do when it's used in an offensive capability, like we know that the admirals can use, right? So what is to say that an admiral can't do this to a Yonko? Yeah, at least to physically harm them to this capacity. We know in term... Yeah. Well, I mean, what's to say Fujitora as a swordsman, as a god tier swordsman, as a swordsman that was picked to be an admiral? Surely he's got advanced Rio, right? Well, I I don't even think honestly at this point in time I think the four Yonko haven't really been active. I think all the pirates that came after the four Yonko tried to invade their territory, and all the pirates that came up through the ranks, they were strong and they were hella there. Some might have made it to a Yonko, or some might have warranted a presence from the Yonko, but at that point they'd already fought subordinates and they'd already been worn down, and they did not stand up to scratch. I don't think Mihawk's much different. I don't think Mihawk has fought Kaido, otherwise Kaido would definitely have another scar, but Mihawk would probably be dead. You know what I mean? But, Daniel, well, Dan, Daniel, I've been building to a point here, so think of this. These five supernovas versus two Yonko, right? And we had the four commanders of the Revolutionary Army and speculatively Bonnie, who was present, versus two admirals. We have two storylines running side by side parallel. With that, when Oda does that, to the point where up until this point in the story, you can argue who's stronger, an admiral or a Yonko. It doesn't matter, because at this point in time, Oda's drawing those parallels of these clashes, right? One's gonna win and one's gonna fail. And considering there's a lot of conjecture about having Saba already been lost or captured, this is going to be very interesting for the end of Wano. Well, I don't. I I think there'll be a definitive winner out of the groups. But do you know what the interesting question is? We've we've been hinted at that the revolutionaries have already lost because seemingly something's happened to Sabo, right? Or something's happened with Sabo. Mm-hmm. So seemingly they lost, or it could always be a massive plot twist that they actually succeeded and overpowered the admirals and got Kuma out of there. They didn't kill the admirals because they're not killers. They got out of there. They wrote a terrible period piece about Sabo, but we could lose here at Onigashima. Now, I don't really think we're going to lose at Onigashima, but there's a lot of possibilities for how the fact that the plot lines have been set up parallel. You have Luffy and Sabo, right? And you could even make the argument that during the 2 year time gap, when Dragon got Robin to come to the Revolutionary Army and all that sort of stuff, we don't know what knowledge that Dragon found out. For all we know, Dragon thinks that Sabo's Joy Boy, or that he himself is Joy Boy to some extent. So he could be putting all his chips into that basket where we, as the readers, know it's Luffy. And we're following an identical parallel story, but we know one's going to lose and one's going to succeed. Uh, the inheritor of the will. The inheritor of the will. Whatever it is that Odin was saying, wait until 20 years. Wait until this year now for anything that's going to go on in the world. Because this will be the year that stuff's decided. Tell you what, this is damn good. This is damn good. Damn good chapter. Yeah, it's such a good. Oh, it's honestly, it's actually just like sort of crazy. I'd also like to point out that Kaido's healed. The wound that got opened up by the scabbards is fully healed. So I'm just putting it out there. If a zone's awakened, don't they normally heal very fast? We saw that with the Impel Down guards. I think it might depend on the zone. I I am not entirely sure because the Impel Down guards, they all had what looked like a hybrid form where their top half was an animal, bottom half was human. They were all awakened. We haven't seen an awakened zone outside of that. We know that the healing factor and that came from the awakening, but we don't know if they were just in those modes because of it or because they just are comfortable relying on themselves in that sort of form. You know what I mean? Like, it might have something more to do with the hybrid form, and it's very interesting that we've seen Page One and Ulti's hybrid and X Drake's hybrid, but we haven't seen anyone else's hybrids yet. More specifically, we haven't seen Kaido's hybrid yet. So this this is definitely something that's going to, like, from here on out, it's very interesting. And I think the craziest thing is that this chapter didn't end Act 3. The fact that we have them face to face and Act 3 is not over. So if next chapter doesn't immediately set up the last few people or the last few chess pieces for this battle and end the act, I'm very scared. Because that... And even what's Yamato gonna do? When's when's Momo's dragon form gonna become relevant into the story? Which makes me ask a very unique question. Luffy normally fights the villains 3 times. This would only be the second time he's fighting Kaido. He fights him once, gets absolutely smashed, fights him a second time with an understanding of their power, and gets beaten down, comes back a third time with a definitive plan, wallops. Yep. Very interesting. Well, do you know what else is something I'm just looking at the moment? So the last couple chapters, we know that Big Mom has powered up Zeus to an absolute maximum with the help of Kaido channeling lightning, right? So we know that Zeus is the strongest that he's ever been in the story. Everyone here, bar Luffy, uses metal to fight. I would not be surprised if we start seeing Big Mum doing some chain lightning attacks that just absolutely devastate the reinforcements here of Kid, Killer, Zoro, Law. Yep. So she literally, at this point in time, has a ability to nerf everyone or like directly target everyone, I should say, except for Luffy. It, I'm almost at a loss, if that makes sense. Just because there's so much that can go on. This chapter did a lot, but it also didn't do anything, if that makes sense. Now, I don't know if you saw the messages I sent you earlier as well, but this also, after this chapter, this made me think of a few other things and further back in the series. This is the first time we've seen Rio. I shouldn't say the first time, but this is the first time we know we've seen Rio in an assault, as in an active attack, right? Now, we don't necessarily know the aftermath of what that attack has done. We know Clyde is on the ground, and that's a massive feat, considering Gear 4 wasn't able to do that. But, you know, it's internal damage in that. We know that Saab... Yeah, definitely. Whether or not... So the exact translation that we've seen here is, I'll surpass the both of you. Whether or not that's individually or combined, it doesn't matter. There's an implied difference in strength. Um, See, this brings me back to Sabo being the other person that we know who has Rio as an as a striking base combatant, right? Also very interesting that he's the other person paralleled right now with Luffy going up against two seemingly of the strongest figures in the world, right? This just feels like good damage control for Burgess and how easy Burgess got defeated in Dressrosa. Because going back to their fight and specifically their panel in the arena, Sabo and Burgess clash both using arm and haki, and none of them overpowers the other. They're equal. Then Sabo specifically activates Rio and destroys Burgess's armor and guard. That's what causes Burgess to be slightly overpowered and for him to get the Devil Fruit. Now, with what we're seeing right now, with how devastating Rio is, I feel like that does a lot better at making Burgess look better in retrospect, if that makes sense. Like, we know that Rio was always going to be strong, but the fact that having Rio makes a difference from not just being able to damage a Yonko, but being able to put one down. Like, being able to knock one down in a single punch. This is what the King Punch was stated to do. Being able to bring a Yonko to their knees. You know what I mean? So, there's a lot that goes into this. And, again, sprinkled out throughout the series, and that the people that would have Rio, or that do have Rio, that is sort of a very significant thing. And it's also very significant to know that Zoro has Rio, since we know that he used it against Monet in Thriller Bark. No, in Punk Hazard, right? So, even if Killer and Law and Kid can't hurt the Yonko here, we know definitively that Luffy and Zoro should be able to, because they both have Rio to some extent. It's a scratch. Yeah. So, with how Wano opened up, we had Shutenmaru and Jack fighting in a sword fight, right? And Shutenmaru cut Jack's sword in half, implying that Jack doesn't have a great deal of skill using arm and haki on his sword. We had Killer versus Zoro. Neither's blade broke. Both of them were nerfed, however. Do you think Killer and do you think Kid are going to have Rio and be able to damage these people here? Law, I feel like, is the only one that doesn't need it, just based on how the op power works and how it can negate any defense realistically. I mean, in terms of his Gamma Knife, it does the same thing that Rio does without having the skill of Rio. We did start this journey with Law saying there's a 30% chance to defeat Kaido. And and that was coming in the story with no alliance, no Grand Fleet, no soldiers in Wano. That was just Law's crew, Luffy's crew. Assassinate him. Yep. So that's very interesting here. As a swordsman, Killer should have Rio if Zoro has Rio, just being a New World pirate, just to be able to keep up with actually clashing sword to sword with New World opponents. Doesn't mean necessarily that he's got ridiculous, advanced abilities where he can cut off Kaido's head with a flying slash or anything like that. Like, I'm just talking about they can scratch him, or they could scratch Big Mom. And that would have been part of the reason why their fights are off-screened and that sort of stuff. Or I shouldn't even say that, because for all we know, they've learned it since they fought Kaido and lost to Kaido last. But for them to be here now, everyone that's here now has to be able to do something. Which, again, leads to some interesting strategies. Yes, but Big Mum seemingly needs Rio to be damaged as well because she's just got that iron hide. And and we know as a swordsman, Rio comes a touch easier to learn. Just because it's seemingly easier to imbue a weapon than it is to just outright force Haki out of your body. But coming to strategy now, Daniel, we have Kid, who for the last few chapters has been building up a massive amount of metal, but we also don't see the metal here this chapter. We saw him literally dragging a copious amount of metal out. I do not see it anywhere. Now, mind you, it could be off screen and just out the way for convenience sake. Yeah. And that's understandable. So it could just be a trick of the camera angles. Or Kid and Killer could have their own plan where they're about to try and sneak attack into some capacity with metal in a copious amount as either a diversion or to begin the assault. We have Law, who's able to swap things around within the premise of the room. So something I hadn't thought of in the past, but is very possible, is Big Mum's homies being essentially useless against Law if Law swaps the homies out with metal that's flying around, always keeping the homies out of synchronization of being used by Big Mum. So essentially just removing Big Mum's tools to the point where she's stuck to just use her sword and clash with Zoro and Killer. Well, we know we know you can swap human bodies with things. We've also seen the personality transplant. That's something I haven't thought of. Could he swap the personality of someone else's soul into the homie? It could, like, there's again a hell of a lot of possibilities here, and obviously we're getting to like a bit of a highlight of the arc, but the fact that we're here now, like, this is very Dragon Ball esque. We're in the wasteland on the roof. We're staring each other down. We're about to throw hands. You know what I mean? It's the matchup here is essentially what's going to be the most important thing and how it's going to work, narratively speaking. I see Luffy and Kid sort of battling each other to get hits in on Kaido, like sort of challenging each other to get hits in on Kaido, but as the fight progresses, sort of taking that back step to just be just to just they get that synergy going where they both start reading each other's attacks and know what to do. Same way that Law sort of was able to keep on his toes with Luffy and Law versus Doflamingo, which again, Law having had prior experiences fighting with Luffy might sort of sit on the outline of this. He might be the utility guy in this fight as opposed to the person trying to throw the most punches. He might be sitting in the back, sitting on his rock, manipulating people around in the fights to evade them getting hurt when people that aren't Luffy don't have future sight to be able to evade. You know what I mean? When other people make opportunities, he might be the guy that swaps in with them and hits the Yonko with a gamma knife and then swaps back. There's a lot of room for this fight to be insane. And realistically, this is the first sort of team fight we've had since the Pacifista and Sabity or Oars in Thriller Bark. Mm-hmm. It's easy pickings. That being said, right, it, it's just I don't know what would come next chapter. I don't know if we follow sort of sorting out who Sanji's going to fight, finding out what happened with Jack, just a little bit of tidy up, to finish off the act, because this chapter needed to be the beginning of the fight, and then the act closes. But at the same time, there needs to be some tragedy in my mind to end Act 3. Now, the tragedy that I thought it could have been would have been all the scabbards being out here. But again, the chapter didn't end quite here. You know what I mean? So it's hard to gauge what would come as a worse off moment from here on out. And I mean, that being said, we might just get into a bit of clashing for a little bit while we start to sort out other stuff. And there might not be any necessity, like, there might not end with a tragedy per se, or the tragedy itself might be something else that we haven't thought of, or a way we haven't thought of it in some way. You know what I mean? For example, we could start clashing, and the tragedy could be that Onigashima lands on the capital and kills a hell of a lot of people. The tragedy might be that from the perspective of the people of Wano, they failed. And that would definitely be something that sets both Luffy and, more importantly, Momo over the edge. He needs to accompany the Straw Hats to Laughdale. Doesn't necessarily need to be a member of the Straw Hats. I think he needs to learn the history, and I think Robin needs to teach him how to read the poneglyphs so he can bring back to life that culture in Wano. And I think him at his current state is not a good ruler. He's a good martyr to have the people rally behind, but he would not be a good leader. And I feel like the only person you could find to tutor you in being a good leader would be Luffy. If that makes sense. I could see... I see a sort of theme, potentially, of the last 3 Straw Hats from the Straw Hat recruits that come from the New World, all following a theme. So originally, a lot of people draw the comparison. So Zoro and Chopper were regarded as monsters. Then you had Nami and Robin, the woman that was introduced as a sort of villain that needed to be saved. Then we're introduced to Usopp and Frankie, the Tinkerers. Then we have Sanji and Brook, the suave, the people dressed up in their suits. They were both introduced as well with smoke over them, which is very interesting. A lot of people were using those parallels to try and think of the last Straw Hats, if we were going to have any, past Jinbei. Jinbei follows a theme of being a monster, same as Zoro and Chopper, in a way, since the world views fishmen as creatures. But I think what could actually be the New World connection for the Straw Hats' last stretch of recruits could be Ace. I could definitely see Jinbei, who fought Ace and became Ace's brother-in-arms, joining as the 10th member. Arguably, I'm wrong here. So it could go 2 ways. It could go, we have Jinbei, we have Yamato, and we have Otama and Momo join as cabin boys, or cabin children on the crew. Sort of like how Roger did with Shanks and Buggy. And so Tama has the link with Ace, obviously, and Momo narratively needs to reach the dawn. You know what I mean? On the flip side of that, I could see different sort of arguments being had for other characters. It's very hit or miss, if that makes sense. we just had Daniel Bello in the comments just comment saying Luffy punched a fish in chapter 1 and 1,000, and that is actually a very, very excellent point. We had the Sea King be punched at the beginning of the series, and 1,000 chapters later, we had the world's strongest sea creature, technically, be punched in the face. So thematically, that comes full circle in a lot of like that's really good. Um, I don't know. I always want to go back. Like a part of me is always just derived with power scaling and just wanting to see Kid be super useful. I don't want to throw things like future sight to Kid, but I do want to know what Kid's capable of, and I know we're going to see it here. But I'm really curious because Oda, for the longest, has always said that Kid's the only supernova that he's ever had a long term plan for. I think that if he has Rio, it stems from he learned it the same way that swordsmen learn it in One Piece. Because we know that swordsmen have an easier time learning it. Him as a metal warrior would definitely have an easier time learning it because he's got it as a conduit um, through his metal. So his Rio might not be the same as Luffy's, where Luffy punches you and sends a haki into you that destroys you from the inside out. Kid might have Rio to the same extent that Zoro and Killer do. It doesn't mean he doesn't have the use of it. He just might not be able to project it past his metal. Mm. Mm. I can understand that. I feel like though it more applies to pre-time skip Kid with the 315 mil bounty when Luffy only had 300 mil and he'd broken into Eni's lobby and all that and taken out Crocodile and Moria. I feel like that at that point in the story, that I would agree with you 100%. But now in the story, I know that Kid has tried to go after Big Mum and has hurt one of the commanders. I know that he's clashed with the red hair pirates, and although he seemingly got his ass handed to him, for all we know, he personally took on Shanks. Well, he's had the same feats as Luffy. He just hasn't had the same portrayal. So we have Luffy and Kid both dealing with Big Mom. Both went to the seemingly went in their territory, went in her territory. Both seemingly had injured a commander to the point of them being able to get a Luffy a poneglyph rubbing. Kid, I could argue a poneglyph rubbing too, depending on what you think it is that he got, and getting out of dodge. The only difference is the way it was portrayed. For example, we know that the Big Mum pirates are notorious liars to an extent. So the way that Brule spoke about it, Aruj was the only one that put up any fight against any of the Big Mum pirates, and he was dead and dying in a bush around Whole Cake Island somewhere. Whereas we know that Aruj is alive and well. We know that Brule lies. For example, she lied about the legend of Katakuri, him never being on his back. But we know that Kid isn't the type of person to lie about his feats. He's just insecure about his feats not getting the same recognition in a way. Like, yeah. So I feel like the difference between Luffy and Kid is Luffy's lesson in the bar with Shanks that you don't need to brag. It's not about I'm a manly man. If someone's ideals aren't strong enough to warrant conflict with your own, like Bellamy and Luffy, Bellamy had no dream or no desire in the world where Luffy was still an active dreamer, you know what I mean? That was the lesson there. Mm. Luffy's was humble. Mm. Well, yeah, Kid, again, I'd probably talk about this too many times, but I need to make a video on it. There's a thing in One Piece that I call a theme of threes, where there's three distinct storylines that Oda tells. Like, Oda tells the same storyline three times with three significantly different outcomes or viewpoints. None are wrong, none are right, but he's got one that's a focus that he's sort of implies is the better of the choices. So I think in this situation we have Luffy, Blackbeard, Kid, where Luffy throughout the entire story has never bragged about his accomplishments. He's just done things. And he's done whatever felt right to him at the time. Kid slaughters people that make fun of his dream, but he's still making that pathway to become his dream. So Kid is sort of like like an adjacent line to Luffy. So you have Luffy just on the righteous path, the proper path of the story. We have Kid coming off the side where Kid's like he can't let anyone he always has to have the last word. He has to prove his worth. Where Luffy is happy to take a beating from someone weaker than him when it doesn't matter. And then we have Blackbeard, who's the exact opposite of Luffy, where Blackbeard had no notoriety and wasn't worried about his notoriety. He had a bounty of 0, but he made accomplishments arguably better than the other two. You know what I mean? Yep, exactly. And then being a warlord with a bounty with no bounty. So Oda does Oda does this thing. I think the most prominent version of this is you have Arlong, who grew up with slavery, who decided to be terrible to people. You had Nami, who grew up being enslaved by Arlong, that decided to forgive the fishmen. And then you have Koala, who grew up a slave and decided to try and change the world from stopping the cycle happening again. You know what I mean? It there's definitely this sort of theming that goes into the story, and Oda knows what he's doing when he does it. There's a reason that Kid and Luffy are here at the apex of this moment, and there's a reason why, and this is actually something else that isn't to do with this chapter, but I'm gonna bring it up here. This year's Jump Festa comment by Oda that Shanks is going to make a move this year. I feel like the I feel like the lurking legend was Rox or Im. I feel like more likely it's Rox. So I think it. I think what he was meaning by it. I think what he was meaning by it is that Big Mom and Kaido are the new Rocks, and so we shortly after Oda made that comment, we had the reverie where in the reverie we had Garp talking about, well, if they join forces, and we had Sengoku saying if they join forces, their combined bounty will surpass Gold Roger. So it'll be the biggest threat in history. You know what I mean? I don't think it ends this year. I don't think it can end this year. We've got to finish. We've got to finish this act. We've got to finish this act. We've got to have all the fights, which the fights, the entirety of the entirety of the Marineford fight was 3 volumes, so that was 30 chapters roughly. So, say this doesn't necessarily have as long of a fight because we've already had so much setup for the arc. Say we have at least 20 chapters, 20 to 30 chapters. That's almost a year of publication there, plus the ending of the arc, plus whatever's needed to fill out the rest of this storyline for the moment before Act 3 ends. So there's a lot of time left in it. But I would like to bring your attention back to the idea that the last time we saw Shanks, he was meeting with the Gorosei talking about a certain pirate. That pirate could be Luffy, that pirate could be Blackbeard, that pirate could be Rox, that pirate could be Weevil, that pirate could be some unknown character. I feel like that was a setup for whatever Shanks' move is going to be. Which, if you think about it, like we said earlier about the Sabo and the five people at the Reverie in Sabo, the 3 other commanders, and Bonnie versus Green Bull and Fujitora. We have Luffy, Kid, Law, Zoro, Killer versus Big Mom and Kaido. The only 2 factions left unaccounted for is Blackbeard and Shanks. Yeah, I I don't know because we know that the Marines are also making a move against the Warlords. So when I say that the only 2 factions that are left that aren't doing anything, that's not true. We have the Warlords versus the Marines. The Warlords and Revolutionaries clashing against the Marines at the moment. So the 3 factions that are left, yeah, seemingly with what's left is we have CP0, Blackbeard, and Shanks. Blackbeard's entire crew is set up for infiltration at the moment, and we know that he was specifically going after something. And I have my hard copy of volume 95 at the moment, and more specifically, the thing that I would like to mention with this volume is actually, if I can find it, the most official translation of Blackbeard with what he said the last time we saw him, right? So we're at the pirate island full of lead. Zee ha ha ha, pack your bags onto the ship. Why let the Navy reap the reward when I stand to gain from this? And so that was talking about the newspaper with the news about a assassination attempt, a death, and something to do with the Nefertari family. Or sorry, not that. It was an attempted murder or an assassination plot, a death, and the warlords being abolished. So one of those three things, Blackbeard has now gone, I'm going to reap the benefits of that. It could be that Blackbeard is going to recruit the warlords now that they're no longer part of the Marines. Because I know when the translations came out, we had the scanlations and then we had the Viz translation, which was all very contradicting. But now the most official translation, I would argue, is the Viz hard copy of the book, where they do any final touch-ups that they haven't done to the online digital copies. So Blackbeard can go in any direction, you know what I mean? There's a lot to think about with him, you know? I feel like you could make the argument that Shanks will go after him. I don't think Shanks will interfere, or Blackbeard will interfere in Wano. Because I feel like the entire world wants to see Wano just play out at this point, you know what I mean? And realistically, no one gains anything from coming to Wano, because if the Alliance wins, two Yonko are defeated, and you've got a bunch of kids that are a lot weaker, that only won because of numbers. If the Yonko win, nothing's changed. They're just as threatening as ever, and it just means it's another threat to deal with. No, I don't think anyone's coming to Wano now. I feel like I feel like we're gonna have the intermission for the end of Act 3 whenever that ends, and I feel like definitively that'll happen. Doesn't necessarily have to be very soon, but I feel like it'll happen sooner rather than later. Um, what I could see Shanks do. Oh, yep. Yep. So I feel like the lurking legend. I feel like the lurking legend was a story of rocks, and the whole it'll be the greatest enemy the Straw Hats have ever faced is currently in Wano, because the rocks as they stand currently is Kaido and Big Mom, and that'll hands down be the biggest threat they've faced so far. As for Shanks making a move, I can see it being one of two things. I can see Shanks making a move to actively hunt down Blackbeard, or I could see Shanks actively trying to recruit Mihawk. Both both make sense in a way for the current storyline, if that makes sense. Um, it Shanks' entire crew is made of non-devil fruit users that are Haki specialists. Mihawk doesn't have a devil fruit as far as we know and is a Haki specialist. I would not be surprised if Shanks is trying to bolster his forces, which was what he was sort of trying to do with the meeting with the Gorosei, but we don't know how that went. I would not be surprised if the Gorosei rejected whatever his idea was. I feel like he was suggesting a team up to take down Blackbeard, or maybe someone else. I would lean heavily towards Blackbeard, because I feel like Shanks' storyline's always been Blackbeard's a bigger threat than anyone realizes, and I feel like there's no place in the story for Shanks to hold Luffy's hand again through another war. I feel like that's why Shanks can't show up at Wano, because where we stand in the story, especially after this chapter, Luffy needs to do this himself. And the Supernova need to make their mark on history doing this themselves. Shanks has always been sort of the guardian type. And I could definitely see him going against Blackbeard. I know it was more there's the filler scene in the anime in Marineford where you had all the red hair pirates and the Blackbeard pirates lined up side by side, ready to fight. Which makes a lot of people go, "Oh yeah, they're definitely going to fight at some point." I could see that happening, but I could also see Shanks going and trying to rally his own forces. Being the charismatic dude he is, I could see him having the foresight to go numbers and quality over quantity and trying to make a move against Blackbeard, but I could also see it falling through, if that makes sense. I could see Shanks trying to attack Blackbeard and being defeated. I could see Shanks trying to recruit Mihawk to bolster the forces to go after Blackbeard, while Blackbeard might be trying to recruit the other remnants of the Warlords. Um, if Luffy meets Shanks alive, I feel like it might be after the One Piece is found. Just because just because Mihawk might join the Red Hair Pirates doesn't necessarily mean they won't clash against the Blackbeard Pirates and potentially lose as well. You know what I mean? I feel like Mihawk will be alive at the end of the series, but it doesn't mean he has to be the world's strongest. I feel like he should because of the promise he made with Zoro, but that brings the question that if Mihawk fought Shiryu, is Shiryu a better swordsman if he only wins because of his invisibility? Doesn't make him the world's best swordsman, but it could still deal a defeat to Mihawk. It could be trickery as opposed to skill. That way it doesn't taint the title of the world's strongest. And if Zoro defeats Shiryu, he duels Mihawk later on in the story just for the title. Yep, yep, yep. I mean, we're talking about pirates here. Luffy's realistically the only wholehearted pirate that shouldn't ever play dirty because that's just his code. But we know Luffy expects other pirates to play dirty. Mm. So it's hard. I actually did a little pet project that I was doing yesterday night, last night. I went through the story and I made an Excel spreadsheet of everyone Zoro and Sanji have fought or clashed against, and I added all their bounties in to see who, essentially, if it was an RPG, who would have the most XP, who would have gained the most XP. Um, it's sort of it's very inconsistent with the way I've done it at the moment. And it's something I definitely would like to do a video on sometime. But essentially, with all the people that they've gone against that have bounties, Sanji has clashed against more powerful people than Zoro, only by a little bit. But it also throws the numbers out a bit because Zoro, essentially, everyone that has a bounty that Zoro's fought tallies up to 978 million in a total accumulative bounties. Sanji, however, and this is in there's with King and without King, Sanji I think was at around 1,230 something million and 2.5 billion if you include him having clashed with King. So I that's why I'm saying it's a bit like risky. I have it set up with defeats and clashes. So I was gonna go back through the list and maybe add like any that was a clash instead of adding that bounty to it. Maybe add 30% of the bounty to it as like an XP because you were able to trade blows with the person, but you weren't necessarily shown to be beating them. You know what I mean? Mm. It it was very interesting though because Zoro actually clashed with a lot more opponents early on in the story. Um, but then as the story's gotten into the later stages, Sanji's I've I would say Sanji fights harder opponents, but then you hit the later half of the New World as well. And for example, you know how Zoro's now taken out three of the supernovas in a fight, or clashed, or whatever with three supernovas. So he's um, took on Hawkins, took on Killer, and took on Apu, right? And he's seemingly overwhelmed the three of them, and they're all around. Yep. So their bounties range from 200 to 350 mil. Sanji, though, in a flip stance of that, took on Oven, Daifuku, Page One, also clashed with X Drake. You know what I mean? So it's they've got they've got very equal feats throughout the story currently with who they've fought bounty wise. With you know taking on a commander, bloating it out because Zoro actually hasn't gone up against any commanders so far in this series. Yeah, Die Hard, ride or die. Z- Zoro's stronger than Zoro's stronger than Sanji. Sanji's 100% more useful than Zoro. Fun fact: Sanji has gone up against the main villain of arcs more than Zoro. Sanji's had more moments where he's gone up against the main villain of an arc than Zoro has. That's interesting because and there's somewhere it ties, but like it's very interesting to see that Sanji gets thrown into the deep end against a lot of people and works his way back down the chain, whereas Zoro comes in low in the chain and works his way up. Anyway, uh, no, no, yeah, no, I get you. Um, Going back to the chapter though, right? So at this point in time, can we just sort of agree that in the last 20 years, the Yonko have been very inactive. They've been building their empires, and even when they go out, they only rookie crush. They've never actually gone up against anyone top tier, and that we can now sort of see that that's evident with all the crews. Because incur, yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, see, Katakuri obviously hasn't fought anyone top tier because he's never been knocked onto his back, and anyone of a top tier stature should be able to put up a reasonably good fight against him. As much as I love Katakuri, he's one of my favorite characters in the story. Same with Smoothie. Same with Cracker the Glass Cannon. Um, I'm about to sneeze. Um, I know we've had numerous conversations in the past about how strong is Cracker's biscuits and what could he survive against in a clash, considering the world government doesn't even know what his face looks like. It's not on his wanted poster. So seemingly no one's defeated his Krakus, and at least anyone of a Gear 3 standing, which at this point in the story is a hell of a lot of people. There's a lot of people that can take a Gear 3 hit. But you need at least above Gear 3 stature to damage one of the crackers. You know what I mean? Uh, Going past that, you've got the Beast Pirates essentially. Oh, sorry. Look at look at the Beast Pirates. So they recognize Marco, but they don't necessarily know what his abilities are. Queen's never fought Marco before, considering he doesn't understand how his abilities work. You know what I mean? We know that these top tiers have an understanding of each other from the newspapers and stuff like that, but they've never really clashed, which makes it all the more interesting to me because I feel like it's setting up for the world government and the Marines, and more specifically the admirals, to be a much bigger threat because they actively have to go out and hunt these people. And we know that they've obviously not really captured them per se, or at least not any that we know of. But the fact that Jack tries to attack Fujitora's ship and Fujitora has to put Jack out of commission, the fact that that sort of stuff happens just shows that the admirals have to deal with higher tiers a lot more than the higher tiers have to deal with each other. Or even, and we know a lot of other top tier people that were on her level or comparable to her actively tried to avoid her because it was a nuisance to fight her. Roger snuck into her territory. He didn't fight her. And so even going back to the Rocks era when Big Mom and Kaido was significantly weaker, we had, you could argue that you had Roger and his entire crew. So that's, Roger, Rayleigh, Scopigaban, Bullet if you count Bullet as canon, and Garp fighting the Rocks Pirates. And whoever else was on Garp's crew, whether, Bogart, whether or not you see Bogart as useful. So we've got a comment in the comments from Swordsman of the King. Admirals aren't sent out unless something's important. The only times we really see an admiral sent out is a Buster Call or Celestial Dragon got attacked. You're right and wrong at the same time. for starters, an admiral isn't sent for a buster call. You have 6 to 7 vice admirals sent, no admirals. Um, we know the admirals are more active or take active roles on their own. So again, someone like Doflamingo being captured and having to be taken to jail, that's when the admirals are on the move. But the fact that in the past and around the world, we know that people try to attack celestial dragons and stuff like that, even though it's taboo, that people try to rip off these systems, that the admirals are a bit more active in a sense than some of the commanders of the Yonko crews. The Yonko themselves might be more active because any rookies worthy of dealing with, they seemingly deal with themselves to crush them and, absorb them into their crew. We know that Whitebeard clashed with Ace and made Ace join his crew. We know that Kaido tried to do the same with Hawkins, Killer, and Kid. You know what I mean? They're active, but they're active against rookies. They're not against higher tier people. Whereas the admirals and that have to defend bases, if that makes sense. Yep. And that's what I've see. So I should clarify with the way I think about it, right? I view it as the Yonko are set up like a raid boss. So they're a set strength, and then as a radius out from them, you drop down in strength to weaker opponents around them, right? Any new rookie tries to trudge their way through, but by the time they get close enough to a Yonko for a Yonko to notice them and care about them or want to deal with them themselves, they're already weakened enough that it's fodder. Whereas, and it's a difference in the perspective of how the systems are set up, because for the Marines, how it's set up is they're protecting an island as opposed to, it's hard to specify here, because I'm not saying that the Yonko don't protect their own island, but what I'm saying is they've got a larger territory and a stronger concentration of forces, whereas Marines are spread out all over the place. So in the instance that a Marine has to fight a captain of another pirate crew of that same sort of rookie stature in the up and coming ranks, they're dealing with that rookie at a lot more HP than a Yonko would when their crew have worn them down like crazy. You know what I mean? The best example, they don't have to be fighting stronger people, they just have to be fighting the same people with more HP than the Yonkos would. And at least for keeping their skills up to date, it probably keeps their skills, less rusty. Because we know at least the admirals had to train to get to where they are, whereas Kaido and Big Mom sort of just had to be naturally standing. Whitebeard was born a monster, got a monstrous fruit. Blackbeard seemingly has his own monstrous body to deal with, where he doesn't sleep. He and arguably would never get fatigued because of that. The only exception there is Shanks, and Shanks again being a Haki master comes from that same vein of being as threatening as some of the admirals, with this exception of that we at least know Shanks has conquerors, where we don't know any of the admirals have conquerors. To okay, so, but from that perspective, wouldn't you say the admirals would be over the Yonko then? And I don't know. Like my thought process on the admirals versus Yonko is very the original three admirals though. The original three admirals though all had Rio, and at least two of them seemingly had future sight to be able to dodge Haki based attacks. So like you get what I mean there, where you have the naturally born gifted people, but we know that Big Mum and Kaido don't seemingly have advanced armament Haki or future sight because they rely on their subordinates for that sort of stuff. They're just naturally strong. Whereas the admirals didn't get born with that; they had to train to that. But because they've trained for it, it makes them more deadly in a sense. Before, yeah, yeah, the okay. The best way I can express it right is when Mother Caramel was talking about Big Mom. She goes, she could be an admiral or even fleet admiral, implying that fleet admiral is above an admiral, right? Big Mum naturally is like on that tier with an admiral, but to be a fleet admiral, I would say would to be Big Mum currently, but then have advanced armament and maybe future sight added into her arsenal. You know what I mean? Now I'm not, I'm not trying to overhype the fleet admiral, but like if you're talking about a skill set. And because Oda does a real good job of balancing these people, because the stronger someone is, the bigger the character flaw. But for some of these people, the more ridiculous things they have, the less of the simple stuff they have. You know what I mean? Yep. Yep. Um, that being said, I've got a comment. What do you think of the Luffy versus Katakuri fight? Do you think Katakuri truly lost? My thoughts on that. My thoughts on that is very clear cut. The Luffy vs Katakuri fight is my favorite fight in the entire series. Katakuri is one of my favorite characters. Katakuri did not lose. He actively chose to let Luffy go. However, if they were to fight again, Luffy would absolutely defeat Katakuri. No ifs, ands, or buts. I feel like at the point of Luffy letting Katakuri go, if they started back up at full health, Luffy would surpass Katakuri. Because for the simple fact that Luffy was so far beneath him, but developed so much during that fight, that it closed the gap enough that if it happened again, Luffy would surpass him. And I feel... Go for it. That's fair. Again, it's very slight in the way we perceive it, and at this point in time, it doesn't matter because of the introduction of advanced armament haki. Now we've got another step up past that. It just, I guess, that just changes how we see the gradient of Luffy from the end of the Katakuri fight to the Luffy at the beginning of this fight. Now, you know what I mean? I mean, Luffy is a fighting prodigy, and like realistically, that's true. And I mean, going back to that conversation we're having about Kaido and Big Mom just being born naturally gifted, Kaido and Big Mom seemingly aren't fighting geniuses. They're just, I mean, arguably, Kaido's only strong because of his fruit, and because of that as well, he's now got suicidal tendencies where he doesn't think anything can beat him, so he's arrogant in a way. Whereas Big Mum, again, is arrogant because she comes from a standing of she is ridiculously strong and not many people can hurt her, but at the same point in time, it's not like these two people are actively going against the people that could hurt them. You know what I mean? Like, okay, if we were to reel it back in a bit, right, and try and like suss out what we think happened at Rocks Valley, or at God Valley with the Battle of the Rocks, right? If you had, we saw that Roger started his crew with Rayleigh, and we know that that was seemingly in the East Blue, since Roger is a resident of the East Blue, so that's when he set out to be a pirate, right? That means Rayleigh was present for the battle against the Rocks, seemingly. Who's Rayleigh fighting in that fight? Like, are we having Roger and Garp versus Rocks and Whitebeard? Because I actually probably am on the standing of thinking that the right hand man of the Rocks crew was Whitebeard. I feel like Whitebeard might have been the Zoro of the Rocks crew, if that makes sense. Um, we saw we saw Rocks, Kaido, Big Mum, Whitebeard, and Shiki. We actually saw them in a panel fighting Roger and Whitebeard, Roger and Garp. Yep. Tsuru and Sengoku. I think it was Garp, a few Marine soldiers fighting any fodder on the Rocks pirates, and maybe Garp's right hand man Bogart or something like that. The guy that was training Kobe and Helmeppo. At best, yep. Mm. Uh, Again, I feel like out of the Marines, it was just Garp. Garp was the only one that was really there. Maybe a few fodder people under him that are insignificant. But I feel like seemingly her fame came from being the person that had Doflamingo on the run in her youth. We know from Doflamingo's backstory that he was like terrified of Suru and was actively trying to get away from her. So I feel like they had their cat and mouse game going on there, which sort of comes full circle with Suru being the person that took him and Bill down at the end of Dressrosa. Um, I mean, it's also interesting in the fact that when Doflamingo was first introduced and he was manipulating Stainless to attack another Vice Admiral, Suru's the person that immediately looked at him and was like, cut it out. So they've always had a sort of storyline embedded in the story, I guess. But in terms of her cat and mouse game, it doesn't mean that's the thing that made her a well known person. But I feel like in that battle, I, f- I feel like it was only Garp though for the reason that they made him the hero of the Marines because of the event. I feel like if it was other people involved, we would have got them name dropped because it would have been hyping them up too. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas with the Roger Pirates, I mean, it makes more sense now why Roger had Roger, Rayleigh, Scopogaban, people like Douglas Bullet. He had a big crew. Now we know that not all of them would have been there, and he probably would have had a much smaller crew, probably like the size of the Straw Hats at the time. But the ones that were there, like if you had Roger, Rayleigh, Garp versus a very young Kaido, a young in her 30s Big Mum, Rocks, Whitebeard. Like I could definitely see again Roger and Garp taking on Whitebeard and Rocks in a 2-on-2 where they were tag teaming out and just sort of parrying each other and defending each other, and then the likes of Rayleigh dealing with Big Mum or Shiki or Kaido. You know what I mean? Um, I feel like it was a very uphill fight because I mean these people together are ridiculously powerful, but at the same point in time, we're talking about a Kaido with no devil fruit at that point in time, much younger. I could definitely see him literally being thrown to the wayside by an offhand Rio blast from from Rayleigh. hmm Which leads me to the thought process that seemingly the life debt was Kaido was on his deathbed after that fight, after the Rocks Pirates fell. Big Mum gave him the fish fruit model dragon to heal him because it's a mythical zone of some type, most likely, and that gave him his invulnerability like she has. And considering she viewed him like a little brother and she's a near invulnerable person herself, she might have even been trying to recruit him onto her crew at that point. Yeah, it's very possible in that because again, it's it's very interesting the way that whole storyline sort of lines up and could go down. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of possibilities, a heap of conjecture, and like with everyone that's in the story now, they had to get their sort of prowess from somewhere, but at the same time, they couldn't have been too ridiculous because we know they're stronger now, and even now, people could be improved upon in a way. Like, for example, Big Mum and Kaido have got ridiculous fruits, yeah? They've got base Haki, both Armin and Observation and Conquerors, the two of them, yeah? Well, they've got a ridiculously good fruit, but neither of their fruits are stated to be the best type of fruit, are they? Whereas with the pre-time skip admirals, we have three individuals who have advanced armament, two who seemingly have advanced observation, all three of them having the best caliber of fruit you can have. You know what I mean? It, like, there's a lot of ways for it to sort of plateau or even out. And it's even scary and yeah. Well, pre-time skip it seemed the case because they were intangible. Post-time skip it's like you got Haki, who cares? But it's also interesting that we've never seen a top tier Logia in the series. We know of them, but we've never seen any of them fight. And we've seen aftermath of their fight, which destroyed an island. You know what I mean? It's like it's very Oda specifically left enough of it ambiguous that he could write it any way he wants to make it more convenient for himself. Like, with the story progression, you normally think that people get stronger or go against stronger people each next consecutive arc, right? So, say after this war, the next big war's against the world government. You have Imu, who's an easy person for Luffy to go up against as the big bad. But then how do you have the commanders of the Straw Hat side fight against someone that is commander level or above? It has to be an admiral. It would make more sense for admirals to be more closer to a Yonko then, since like arguably we have people like Marco who, when their captain dies, has to step up to the role of a Yonko, and to be regarded as a Yonko, you've got to hold that same. You got to hold that caliber. You know what I mean? Zoro and Fuji. Mm-hmm. I mean, in those situations though, we still have all of CP0 to be added as potential threats for stuff as well. So it's the thing. The thing I'm more curious about at the moment is in terms of CP0, they haven't had any presence in Wano. Like, we saw them at the beginning of the arc, but it's odd that we haven't seen them try to infiltrate the Beast Pirates, but we know that Sword has. You know what I mean? When they're both seemingly separate entities. So it's a little weird that we still haven't seen a CP0 connection to this crew yet. Yeah. That's definitely true. Um, it's interesting. What do you think? I mean, you're not wrong, especially when we know that a lot of CP members sort of get zones as well. Or at least the CP9s, it was easier for them that we saw having zones, especially joining the Kaido Beast Pirates. Oh, I mean, there's another thing to talk about. We're gonna see hybrid forms for all the Topiropa for sure. What about the commanders? I'd hope to see all the hybrid forms for the commanders. I'd hope to see this war as a back and forth, like a tug of war, where we look like we're winning, all the enemies go hybrid, we look like we're losing, all our members start to pull out their, yeah, their, you know, their last major special before getting absolutely carked. So, yeah. But Apu's up the next chapter, and Drake takes. By the way, Apu, Apu's got some damn good durability considering he's taken like three off guard one shots from three different supernovas and is just getting back up. Just like, come on, dude, what's going on? Like yeah, no, he's definitely that sort of fighter. But it's interesting to see how that goes down with him. Question for you: do you have any predictions for next chapter? I I sort of lean along the idea that next chapter Kaido's gonna get up. He's gonna go and he's gonna be like, "Oh, you were able to hurt me." He'll take a swing at Luffy, and Luffy will dodge it with Future Sight. Then one of the other members that are present, probably Kid, will probably do a similar attack to Kaido again. Not necessarily put him down to the same extent, but land a hit on Kaido, and then it'll cut away. I feel like we might see the Scabbards all down with Momo and Yamato, and her role might be protect all of them. Yep, which would be more interesting if we're wrong and Jinbei doesn't fight him. If Jack goes down the very bottom to heal up, and Jack tries to eliminate all the Scabbards while they're down, and we have Jack versus Yamato. Mm-hmm. Jinbei. Yep. we know he's like able to clash with Ace, so it's like we know he's up on that level, so it's we don't need proof of it. Whereas Yamato, we know has clashed with Ace a little, but it would also be interesting for the likes of Jack to try and fix his mistake of having not tried to. He failed to find Raizo, he failed to kill the Dukes, and he failed to stop shooting Maru. He failed to stop the assault on Kaido. It would be interesting if he goes the route of trying to fix his mistakes and goes after the scabbards while they're all down to make sure they're dead, which is what King and Queen keep saying. You know, we've got to take out we've got to take out Momo. He's the head of the army. That's the person that we need to beat to win the war. But they're also always talking down to Jack for his failure. So it could play into that. I hadn't thought of that prior. It's just sort of spewing out on the fly. But that is something that I could definitely see becoming a route that they take. You know what I mean? Separate to that, if we don't wrap up Act 3 in the next 2 to 3 chapters, I could see it going all the way to the Flower Capital. Yep. 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 You can't reap the benefits of other people's labor. The citizens of Wano, they probably do need to take arms. They do need to choose a side. Which, in all honesty, could be they drop Onigashima on the Flower Capital, everyone's in despair, Act 3 ends, we get the intermission in that with Blackbeard, Kaido, the Warlord's new bounties. By the way, I got some spicy idea for the Warlord bounties. Eh, I got some good ideas for a lot of bounties. In all honesty, I've seen a few other people's like prediction bounties for after Wano and stuff like that. I'll get to that in a second, but then Act 4 opens up and it's a final conflict and it's in the Flower Capital, right? We have a lot more of it. It's narrowed down a lot more to just focusing on Kaido and Big Mom, and I feel like everyone else has been taken out at that point, if that is the route it goes. Um, I could see Momo rallying all the citizens of Wano, and he transforms into a dragon in front of him because he's so scared. And they view it as the Kozuki family has returned. The Kozuki family are gods like Kaido because they can turn into dragons. Pick a side, which god do you choose? We've got Momo and Luffy, who looks like the wisdom god, flying around in Gear 4, versus Kaido, the tyrant god. So I could see it going that route, where it's sort of like back in Dressrosa, where you had, you know, the Lucy countdown with all the citizens like screaming out for Lucy, because you've always got to get the citizens involved for the very end of the conflict. You know what I mean? It, mm, yeah. It it is very interesting, but I'll take a flip back here and I'll talk about bounties for a little bit. Okay, so I'll wrap your mind around some of my thoughts for the bounties. So, what do you think Luffy's bounty will be after Wano? Yep, being 5-6. I personally will say that I think Luffy's 5-6 bounty is the end of the series. I think that's his Pirate King bounty. Do you think he's going to surpass Dragon's bounty? Because seemingly at the moment, Dragon had a higher bounty than Roger. Mm. I think I think he gets a bounty after this arc, and then I think he gets a bounty after the final war. Yep, yep. I feel like Luffy's first bounty was 30 mil, then it increased up to the next 100 at 100 mil, then he tripled his bounty to 300 mil, then he got another mil tacked on at 400 mil. That was his pre-time skip bounty. I feel like from there, he goes from the 400 mil, he increases it to the next 100 mil up, which is his 500 mil. He triples it to 1.5 bill, and then tacks on another bill. I think at the end of this arc, his bounty will be 2.5 billion, which doesn't surpass Kaido or Big Mums because it was a group effort. And I feel like a lot of the people here will get really ridiculous bounty increases because of it as well. I think you'll get credit for this. Not necessarily all the credit, but because Drake's here and Drake's a witness, he will give equal parts credit. And if Drake sees Kid do a fatal wound on Kaido or Big Mom, he's going to get a lot of credit because of it. You know what I mean? No different to Luffy and Law versus Doflamingo. I feel like the jump for Kid will be bigger than the jump for Luffy, but they'll probably be around the same bounty after, if that makes sense. So I think Kid's obviously got a lower bounty than Luffy at the moment, but they might both have the same bounty when this arc finishes because it might go to a stock standard bounty for the new Yonko. You know what I mean? So, so, mm-hmm. So I could see Luffy getting that 2.5 billion bounty. I could also see, because of that, Blackbeard's bounty currently is 2.2 bill. So that would make Luffy's current new bounty higher than Blackbeard's current bounty, right? But I feel like during the intermission, we will get the reveal of the new Warlord bounties, and we will get Mihawk's bounty around 3 billion. So Mihawk and. Yep. It's possible. It's possible. I definitely could see that being the case, but it's hard for me because I feel like the bounties they're a reward for the reader, if that makes sense. So I feel like Luffy being 2.5 would be higher than Blackbeard's bounty when Blackbeard was considered a Yonko. So it would make Luffy more impressive than what Blackbeard did at Marineford. You know what I mean? Getting two devil fruits, having essentially played both the Whitebeard pirates and the world government. Luffy having taken down two Yonko, him, Kid, Law, Killer, Zoro split the credit in unequal amounts. You know what I mean? Yep. Yep. But Blackbeard also had all the Impel Down level 6 prisoners join him as well, whereas Luffy doesn't have that. Yes, but that'll be the flip side where I reckon they'll be sort of equaled out in terms of infamy because the Grand Fleet hasn't made their move yet. Like they're not super well known yet, so they're not exactly equivalent to level 6 prisoners. The people comparable to Jimbei, Ace, Crocodile. You know what I mean? So well, so this is where I see it. So Mihawk comes out with a bounty updated of 3 billion. So we now have a rough idea for where Zoro needs to be at the end of the series in terms of strength. Just under the Yonko, clearly above every other commander. The flip side's going to be Blackbeard's going to get a new bounty for whatever he's going to do off screen in Wano. And I feel like Blackbeard is whatever he's planning to do now is going to put him above Kaido. Whether that's defeat Shanks and recruit warlords or what, Blackbeard's going to do something and he's going to be the new. It's going to be Luffy and Blackbeard are the only two realistic pirate villains left. Like they're the only two real pirates. Like oh no. It's like I'm saying like if Shanks recruits Mihawk, but Blackbeard manages to recruit the other current warlords or something, might not be like you got no idea. It might be that he's going after certain people's fruits because like Weevil's got a grudge against him, so Weevil wouldn't just join him openly. Boa despises men. She definitely despises Blackbeard because of Luffy. Mihawk probably would go with Shanks over anyone else, and Buggy's the only other warlord, and Kuma. You know what I mean? But say Blackbeard manages to finesse his way in, take out a Yonko, and gain a significant number of strong high tier recruits as well. You know what I mean? That is enough to put him at the strongest Yonko, in my opinion, because that'd be the only Yonko that's toppled another Yonko with no help. And more importantly, Shanks, I think, is the most threatening Yonko because he's the youngest Yonko and he is the only Yonko without a fruit, so he's got the most potential for threat. That would skyrocket Blackbeard up in infamy and it would definitively staple him as the worst pirate in history so far. You know what I mean? Go for it. Yep. Yep. Uh, I would go for the op fruit for a paramecia any day of the week. For zone, I'd go Marco's fruit, the Phoenix fruit, any day of the week. Maybe the dragon fruit, but Phoenix probably any day. It's a toss up between the Rumble fruit, NL's fruit, or the Pika fruit in Kizaru's fruit. What about you? What would your paramecia be? Good fruit, good fruit. Your zone? Okay. And your Logia? I think Kizaru's fruit lets him travel at the speed of light. I think that's it. Like I think that's what it does. A lot of people say he's got to reflect himself off surfaces. I don't necessarily know if that's true, but I think he's limited by human cognitive skills. Even with things like advanced observation hacking and stuff like that, you're limited by your own ability to process information. So just because you can travel a certain speed doesn't mean you can drive at a certain speed. You know what I mean? Like you can drive a car at 200 kilometers an hour doesn't mean you can turn well. So like when Kizaru uses a fruit, I think he can use it to its full its capabilities, but I think he uses it smarter where it's, if I reflect it off surfaces, I can control where it goes better. So I think no. I think you can go slower. You can go slower up to the speed of light. And I think in terms of combatability, I think a lot of people get this wrong with Kizaru. Whenever we see him fight, when he says he kicks at the speed of light, I think it's sort of misleading because I don't think he's kicking you at the speed of light. I think what he does and the way it's portrayed is he shoots his foot. He uses his. Imagine if he had like rocket shoes on, right? He shoots light at the back of his foot, but his foot still has mass because you can't move mass at the speed of light, otherwise it'll destroy everything. You know what I mean? So he's projecting the speed of light off the back of his foot, but his mass is causing rapid deceleration. It still results in a ridiculously fast and potent kick, but it's not you're getting hit at the speed of light with every single attack. He just sort of shoots at that speed. Yeah. See, the or just sprint sort of thing. Like he doesn't sprint super speedy. He just turns into light and moves, or he's just stationary. See, Kizaru's Kizaru's very strong but very limited by that because it's also weird because he's able to make constructs out of light with his the light sword that he made, and he's able to shoot lasers off. So is that light, or is that just like an area of like superheated plasma, or is that like he has to shape that thing and hold its shape with Rio? You know what I mean? Like there's because it's happening pre time skip. There's not enough information to go on. If he's able to make those constructs out of light and they all work with the same properties. Like clashing a sword with him results in a series of explosions around you that he's immune to because he's light. You know what I mean? Rayleigh. But then that's because Rayleigh's using Rio as well, so maybe he's containing that sort of property by not actually touching it with his sword, just theoretically using a thin coating of Rio to keep it off his sword. You know what I mean? It's There's not enough information to go on. Yep. It's interesting. Well, it's also the one that we haven't seen. Like, it's the one we've seen the least amount in a way because pre time skip, weak Logias were the strongest people. Post time skip, we saw Luffy and Zoro deal with a weak Logia. Um, Actually, we've dealt with three weak Logias post time skip, and they were not difficult. But then we haven't seen another Logia since. We know of high tier Logies in the Admirals, but we still don't even know what an Admiral's capable of. You know what I mean? Like, if we finish Wano and the island's not destroyed, do you think an Admiral's stronger than a Yonko because of the aftermath of Punk Hazard as opposed to Wano? DC's only important when there's potency involved. Otherwise, it's only useful against fodder. It's no different to Conqueror's Haki. You know what I mean? The five Shinobi. Yep. DC's only important when potency comes along with DC. Like, for example, Big Mum's Izuku Sovereignty, the Elbaf Spear. That is a good attack because that deletes everything in its path. That, like, I am looking forward to see if Killer and Zoro can block or cut through an Elbaf Spear. Because if they can do that, that shows to me that they've increased their swordsmanship, and that shows they're on their way to the strongest swordsman. Because at the moment, like Big Mom has Big Mom is a swordsman. It's in her arsenal, but she's not solely a swordsman. But she's capable of a deleting attack. And according to the anime, the Elbaf Spear and the Thunder Bagua are equivalent in terms of damage. Kaido was able to block an Elbaf Spear with his Thunder Bagua, the move he used to one-shot Luffy. So it's like, outside of that, it's sort of useless. Like, for example, see, yep. It would be better if it did like a projectile sword slash off the tip that like spiraled like a circle. Um, it's sort of different because okay, here's a question for you. You know how Dory and Broggy could do that? They did the Elbaf Spear back in Little Garden. See, well, yeah, lightning is a third of the speed of light, and lightning also means you could produce unlimited electricity and things like that. There's a lot you could do with it, and restart your own heart. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, this is really out of nowhere, and this is probably leading to another stream that we have at some point. I was having a conversation with my fiance the other day, um, heap of stuff about One Piece, and then it got me into a thought process of a lot of the time we see like we perceive one crew stronger than the other crew, right? In a 2v2, who would win? Oven and Daifuku, who are both around the 300 mil mark. They both have a 300 million berry bounty, right? They're both roughly on the like they're sort of the stronger people on the crew outside of the commanders, right? Even though we have Tamago and Peckham's with a higher bounty and Perisparrow, they were the active soldiers in Whole Cake, right? Oven and Daifuku versus Who's Who and Sasaki. Seeing as how they seem to be the independent, active members of the Beast Pirates. It's a hard matchup because again, like we can't always assume that if the Yonko crews clash that it'd be 1v1. So throwing in tag teams and stuff like that is always very interesting, and they sort of hold the same social standing on each other's crews of the two strongest sort of outside of the commanders, because we know you got the three all stars of the Beast Pirates, and we've got the three sweet commanders. Snack got demoted. Perisparrow's got a high bounty, but he's also the oldest, so you could argue that that bounty's only there because he's been around for so long. And outside of that, like the other combatants were captains of their own crew at some point in time until they joined Big Mom. Whereas Oven and Daifuku have just been stationary soldiers. You know what I mean? Like, do you see Oven and Daifuku as the strongest people outside of the commanders on Big Mom's crew? Okay. Well, here's a follow-up question. What would you say all the Topiropo bounties are, roughly? I arrange them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, so it was very interesting actually. So I went through and I made an Excel sheet of every bounty in One Piece that we know of, and there are big gaps in bounties. Like we pool in sort of like a few major areas, so bounties are sort of pooled around the 7 to 30 million mark. Then it skips, and there's a couple between the 50 to 70 mil mark. Then it skips, and then there's some just around the 100 mil mark, and then there's some just around the 200 mil mark, and then there's a heap around the 300 mil mark, and then it sort of jumps again to like just under the billions. So it's interesting that there's been like such a sort of big jump in bounties, because in between introducing bounties that are like the next higher batch, we always fight opponents that sort of don't have bounties, if that makes sense. Um, I would probably put the Topiropo around the 400 mil mark to the 600 mil mark in a reasonably tight cluster. Um, Maybe a little bit higher. It's hard because the big mum pirates all have super low bounties because none of them are very active. They're actually a very passive crew, realistically. Um, yeah, they're the weakest Topiropo to me, and I could definitely see them being around like because X Drake as an Allosaurus had a 222 mil bounty pre time skip. So just having an ancient zone, say that around the 200 mil mark, throw on Haki, add another 100 mil or 200 mil. Like throw 100 mil on for being Haki users, throw 100 mil on for being captains. Low 400 mark. And that's having a bloated bounty being part of like a Yonko crew as well now. You know what I mean? It's hard though. It's hard because like the other people that you can compare 300 mil to, realistically, like pre time skip, it was Doflamingo, Kuma, and Moria that were around the 300 mil mark. Do you think any of them would be worth 300 mil if they had a new bounty right now, if they got issued a brand new bounty? And Moria. They were around that mark. They were around that mark. Well above that. Because I see all those people beating someone like Hawkins. And Hawkins is on that 320 mil mark at the moment with the likes, or like realistically, I don't know if they even like. It's hard to say because Zoro, Sanji, Apu, Hawkins, and Killer are around that sort of band, right? With people like Oven and Daifuku, but at the same time, the warlords that we've compared Luffy to, that we try to use as a benchmark for that threat level, they were frozen at that level. And they were frozen reasonably early on, and there's no clear indicator of what that strength was from the people that Luffy's fought, if that makes sense. It's hard. It's hard. Well, it was accurate pre-time skip when no one had a bounty like that. When we've entered the new world, like realistically, all the warlords were Supernova. That instead of going to going to a Yonko, the world government was like, "We'll take them." They were impressive enough for us to take them, and that's really all I see it as. You know what I mean? That it was a batch of Supernova that went to the Marines instead of the warlords, instead of the Yonko, because yeah, it's interesting. See, that's did the same essentially. Well, we know they got offered, but the people that like got offered definitely accepted it. Outside of the only one we know that didn't accept it was Ace. You know what I mean? Yeah. Mm. I can see that. Again, it's weird because like with the Oven and Daifuku versus Page One and Sasaki, like I would expect Sasaki and sorry, yeah, Huzu and Sasaki to have higher bounties than Oven and Page One, but I also feel like Page One and that Oven and Daifuku have just got real good synergy, being siblings. He's cooking them. Well, we even saw that he can do heat torpedoes. So what's to say that he can't? And we saw him ignite metal with his eyes. He can look at something metal and ignite it. And Who's Who and Sasaki are both swordsmen. So it's like, and with Who's Who being furry, that would be such a bad matchup. I mean, cutting ships in half is impressive, but we haven't seen him be able to defend his own body without that, and we haven't seen Haki come off him, even though we know he's got observation and armament. But we don't know if he can use it in conjunction with the genie. Just because he has it doesn't mean the genie has it. Pick is a tough one, okay? Yeah. Genie. Get around the genie. Just send a few projectile slashes. Just past the genie. I mean, to be fair, I feel like Sasaki is going to be heaps slow. Like, I know so many people were super hyped for Sasaki. Do you know what I actually hoped was going to happen? Everyone was predicting Sasaki was going to be a Triceratops, right? I was hoping so bad that Oda would just pull a swift one on everyone. And you know how he's got the train conductor hat? Imagine if he was an ancient giant millipede. An ancient giant poisonous millipede. They used to exist and they used to be like pretty big, right? Imagine how bad it would have been because he would have been a human train with like millipede scales as armor, and he would have been able to run around and bite you and poison you while also sword fighting you, having 100 arms or 1,000 arms. That would have been cool. And could you imagine that if it was a hybrid where he just gets super armored up, right? Can almost It's almost like being able to spring himself because he can extend his body in that to attack forward and then like retract it back, and he's just sword fighting you like that. That would have been cool. But I'm not disappointed with the Triceratops. It's just like I was hoping for a bigger plot twist for it, considering the other Topiropo members weren't as expected. Like there's no T-Rex, there's no Raptor. You know what I mean? Yeah, no, it's I'm happier that they were different. I'm actually more upset that more of them weren't more different, if that makes sense. Like I've seen a good idea that you know uh Black Maria, how she's got the top half torso of a human and the bottom half of a spider, and it's very different to every other zone. I saw a killer theory. I don't know who it was by. I saw a killer theory that the woman half is actually silk, and it's a trap because she's based off like an ancient trap type of tarantula, and so she's able to entice people into the pleasure quarter as victims with like a silk puppet. That would have been cool. Or she's like able to leave like a silk exoskeleton shell on top of the spider as like a bait. Just cool concepts like that. Like Who's Who being a Sabretooth. Everyone sort of expected it, and it was pretty cool, you know. Not disappointed with any of the top Europa. It's just at the same time, reading week to week and speculating for so long, your imagination can run wild. So you're always super happy with some, but like feel like Oda's missed a possible like massive opportunity in other places. Hmm. Honestly, for the most part, I agree with you, but I feel like he's gonna find weird ways to do it with the intermissions in Wano going forward. I've gone on the record in the past on saying I feel like chapter 957, the ultimate chapter where we got the 4 Yonko bounties, Roger and Whitebeard's bounty. You don't do that as an author if you can't top it. I think he's got other things in the other intermissions that he thinks will top those things. I think he's expecting, or he's set up enough things to just keep breaking the internet. And he's set it up in a way that in the past it had a lot of conversation, but I feel like now he's able to just start executing them one after another. And because the story's already in a hype situation, it just will keep that ball rolling, if that makes sense. Like, we had Blackbeard's bounty in the first intermission. Then we had all the Yonko bounties in the second intermission. I wouldn't be surprised if in the new intermission we get all the Warlords' new bounties and maybe the Revolutionaries' bounties or Dragon's bounty. You know what I mean? And then in the final intermission, we get to see the aftermath of, you know, Shanks versus Blackbeard or something tremendous like that. Only to have like 5 chapters back at Wano to wrap stuff up and go back to the world and have the Straw Hats get all that information soaked in. It would not be that hard to just keep that hype building past what people expect. You know what I mean? Like, we got Rogers and Whitebeard's bounty, things we've wanted since the beginning of the series. Okay, what would be next? Well, okay, what's the ceiling for Zoro with Mihawk's bounty? What's the ceiling for bounties full stop with Dragon's bounty? What's happened with Sabo, Vivi, Boa? What happened to all the Warlords? Have all the Warlords been captured? Have they escaped? Did they beat the Marines? You know what I mean? Oda's got a good way of knowing how to go uphill. And I think that's surprising because not many people are thinking of them. But again, what if at the time it's higher than Blackbeard's bounty? You know what I mean? So, yeah. I know a lot of people have put Mihawk either like 4 billion with Shanks or at the 2 billion mark below Kaido because Kaido's the Yonko and he's got to be weaker than Kaido because that's how the story's set up. You know what I mean? And we're talking about one man here as an individual, which makes it very different because that's an individual's threat level. And in this situation, it would be a threat level for an individual, not an individual and his crew and his affiliations. So that's why whatever that number's ballooned to is the most interesting because then you've got a good benchmark for what Zoro will be at the end of the series in that. With Roger's bounty release, we know what Luffy needs to surpass, but we don't know what the roof is for him to potentially break through. You know what I mean? Same with Blackbeard. If Blackbeard ends up getting a higher bounty than Kaido, well, okay, he's still got 1 billion worth of wriggle room between Kaido and Gold Roger. You know what I mean? It's, there's a lot of potential to be had. That being said, I think we've been streaming for 2 or 3 hours now, so we should probably start wrapping it up. Anything you want to say? All good. Yeah. Well, you know, until chapter 1001, which I'm sure will be another spectacular chapter. Radio. Thanks for anyone that came out to join the stream. You know, always helps to like the stream or subscribe and that sort of good stuff. Always feel free to hop in the comment section or the live chat and, you know, hit us up with any questions. We always try to get through to any that anyone hits us up with. And until next time, have a damn good weekend and enjoy your One Piece. Bye. Oh,